Hi, this is Neil and Tamar Caulkins. We're the Caulkins Guitar Duo, and here from Ellensburg, Washington. We wanted to talk to you about a piece that we're working on that we're very excited about. It's by Antonio de Abreu. He was a Portuguese composer working in Madrid in about 1799. This is a manuscript, and even though it's in hand, and you might expect there might be more mistakes, but you'll find these kinds of mistakes in any piece that you're working on. So, as a chamber musician, first thing you're going to do is number your measures. And we like to do that in fives, 5, 10, 15, 20, because then we can easily each find the measures that we're talking about.
And so we numbered these measures. We had like 157 measures in the first movement, which we thought, great, we have the same number of measures. Not paying much attention to the fact that that's not divisible by 4 or 8, the size of normal phrases and subphrases in music of this period, but whatever. So we started playing through it. The middle portion of the piece was sounding very, very off, and then it came back together and ended up ending fine. And so it took us a while to realize what was going on. The problem was that each of us was missing a measure in 2 different places. And so, or in different places. And so figuring out where those were and what those were became then our next task. It wasn't really all that difficult because there are these repeated figures or thematic elements that suddenly you notice they're oddly missing, and then if you put them back in, then suddenly things start jiving up. The theme is something like this. And I had one place where it went, instead of that, it went. So it was missing a measure, basically. So once I put that measure that was missing in, then it started sounding better until, of course, we got to where Tammy's measure was missing, and she had a similar thing that were some repeated measures which were not repeated.
Yeah.
And once she realized that and put that in, then suddenly the piece all starts making sense. So these problems, we're going to talk about 3 of them that we encounter in this piece, and it's not limited to when you're working on something that's in hand, something that's a manuscript. We found missing measures, wrong notes, smudges, all of that in printed editions, modern editions, all kinds of things. There are mistakes made, and so you have to just pay attention to them, notice them, and you working together with your partner and relying upon what you learned in theory and in counterpoint is that will pull you through. Those are the tools that you need to reconstruct this sort of thing. So that's how we reconstructed the missing measure aspect. That's thing number 1. Thing number 2 is, if you'll see in my part, there are these enormous smudges where a lot of measures are just very messed up and unreadable. Looking very closely at those smudges, you can still make out shapes and clusters, and so you get some sense of what the melodic contour was and what the rhythmic content was. And that, coupled with what the composer has been doing previously, where he's going, that kind of thing. And of course, your knowledge of theory and counterpoint allows you, when I'm working on my part alone, to say, well, it looks like it's this. And so then I would write up my guesses as to what these missing measures were, and then we would come back together and play them and say, oh yeah, that works, or that's close, but we massage these notes a little bit or change this and that, and eventually we come up with reconstructing what was within those smudges. So it's sort of an important, an opportunity for a public service announcement when you're playing from manuscript. Don't drink and play. There are not other editions out there that somebody off in the future could look to see what was meant in that measure. Once it's smudged, and this was the only copy. So those were two things that we had to work on to reconstruct this piece. The third is another, which, as I said, you'll find in printed editions from the day, you'll find it in modern editions today, and that is just flat out wrong notes. And so this is, you have to really listen, and you have to remember what you learned in theory and counterpoint, and you have to think about, okay, this piece needs to sound like what one would expect from 1799.
And the tricky thing with this is that each of the parts sounded fine on their own. It's just when we put them together, you're like, are you playing the right notes?
Yes.
And you have to have, a discussion.
And so my part, for example, here at measure 96, alone sounds perfectly fine and something you would expect from the period. Fine. But when you put it together with the second part, how it's written, then it sounds like this. So here is what it sounds like as written. Oh, sorry. Sounded okay until those last couple notes, didn't it? And so we worked together to try to say, okay, the composer's doing this thing in thirds. What if you changed your part to be like mine? Because those last two notes of that of beat 2 were you have a fourth going into a second. It's like no, 1799. I don't think so. And so we had Tammy mimicking my part, and then we did with me mimicking her part, and that's what we settled on. That is this. So you can feel that once we got to, oh yeah, yep, that's right. And so those were the three things that we worked on in reconstructing this piece. Figuring out what were the missing measures, figuring out what were these measures that were completely smudged by some sort of historic spill, and then just dealing with your random wrong notes.
Okay, so the piece is in 4 movements. We've talked about some very tricky things we had to change in the first one. And the second movement is this enchanting Andante, and we'd like to play just the first line for you. So then the piece ends up with a Allegro and a Minuet, and we're really excited to share this piece with you at a future date very soon. Thank you.